Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Mike here from the Drum Candy Podcast. This video is a compilation of parts 1 and 2 of our interviews from Season 2, Episodes 1 and 2, featuring Stella Mozgawa and Bryan Hollon of the electronic duo Belief. Stella is probably best known as the drummer in the great indie rock band Warpaint. Bryan goes by the moniker Boombit for his electronic music productions. He's also a great songwriter. They first got together in a band called Neon Neon, so definitely check out Warpaint, check out Neon Neon, check out all of Bryan's stuff under Boombip and his own name, and most definitely check out Belief, which is their collaborative project. So in this interview, we talk about how they write, first of all, how they got together to form this project, how they compose, what gear they're using on stage, and then just what's in the future for the project. So check it out. Here is Stella and Bryan of Belief. All right, so I did see you guys at the DC show, the Capitol Turnaround.
Oh, wow.
A couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the first time you guys have performed live as a duo? Like this recent tour?
No, we've been doing, this project was called Beef before it was called Belief. And we probably did maybe 5 or 6 live sets together as Beef. We didn't have songs at that time though, so we would just kind of hook up the machines and just improvise. And so these shows the show that you caught is really the first time we attempted to play songs. It was not an improv set.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we've been playing together for a little bit.
Yeah, and while we were doing those improvised sets earlier, we were in the process of making the album. And I think every time we tried to marry those things before the record was done, it felt like we were rushing it, and we were kind of enjoying the jam quality of doing these improvised electronic sets, and I feel like it was good training for us to then get into the studio and generate new ideas. So yeah, it was I think the two worlds influenced each other looking back.
So how much of your live set now is still improvised versus adhering to what's on the record?
Quite a bit. I mean, I don't know. It changed every night, but what Stella's doing on TR8 is pretty much all still improvised. I mean, you have kit sounds that you have saved.
Yeah,
so
I kind of switch. Yeah, switching between sounds that are relevant to the songs that we play, but the builds, the effects, the dynamics of things, how hard we go, like that's all a feeling, that's all improvised. Yeah. We don't really, I mean, we've definitely gone through moments of being frustrated with technology or frustrated with the interplay between machines not quite working the way that we want them to, and just thinking, God, I remember, Bryan, you texted me and you're like, wouldn't it just be so much easier if we did what most people do when they do a kind of electronic set and just kind of DJ off CDJs or just play a pre-recorded thing? Not that everybody does that, but I think there's definitely a leniency with playing or DJing, pre-recorded things and live mixing them together. But I think it takes all of the fun away for us, and I think we're honouring that work that we put in the early days with improvising and kind of feeling things out. And you still, you get off stage and you can have that feeling that you do when you're playing in a band, which is like, tonight was really good. Tonight felt like we hit all the marks, and we flowed really well. And the things that, if we felt a dynamic shift together without speaking, that's a really satisfying, exciting moment. It's like a bass player and a changing at the same time and kind of being shocked that you both had the same idea at the same moment. That kind of stuff still happens with our setup. And so, we try and retain as much of that as we can.
Are you using Ableton Live to give you any kind of background? Like, if you're improvising, the arrangement's going to evolve. So is it live as your template?
Yeah, we use live as the main clock, and what I have in there are mostly the bass lines from the tracks, the stems from the tracks, mainly because they're repetitive, and to just sit there and play the same thing over and over and over with, electronic music is not exciting. So it made sense to kind of can the bass lines in Ableton, but we have them kind of set up as long loops. That way there's no really set time of when the song starts or ends. And so we're just triggering loops, and then Ableton feeds MIDI out into that Roland SPX, and then from there out to the various machines.
Yeah, I managed to get this. Didn't even really think how special it was, but this great bit of kit, the Roland SPX1, I think it's called. It's kind of really hard to find now. I think they discontinued it, right, Brian? You were trying to find one.
Yeah. I was trying to pick one up. They used to be like $250, and now they're going for like $1,000 if you can find them.
Yeah.
And I don't think Roland had any intention of creating this incredible device. It seems like one of those accidental, legendary creations that just no one else makes it. So I have no idea why they stopped making something that they're the only ones that manufacture.
So
you know what I mean? There's a demand for it.
Yeah, it's like, the other option is like the Kenton Pro Solo and that kind of stuff. But
what does it do?
It's really it's a sync box. It's really utilitarian. It's basically it's got MIDI in, MIDI out, USB in, CV in, and then I think it also has, I'm not sure if it has the Korg hertz voltage split thing that you can actually, I haven't looked into that, but it has a lot of sync opportunities, and it's part of the like, I think it was called the IRA, not the ARIA, but the IRA, like the first TR8 that came out a couple of years ago, like that weird kind of like neon greeny, really bright aesthetic. It's part of that line, and it was basically, it's just like an amazing, really solid sync box between. Oh, it has DIN sync as well, so it can sync to 606 and the 303. The original.
Which is why we use it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like, it's extraordinarily useful. It was so cheap. I didn't even think twice about buying it. I was like, oh, this seems great. I just want a little MIDI sync box or something that I can use with my 606. And then they just kind of stopped making it. But it's really useful for us because sometimes if certain things aren't necessarily clocking on the one, when we play, there's like basically this reset button that you hold it and it will start the loop again. And it has an inbuilt shuffle as well. So you can just shuffle every single device that's plugged into it. And I just can't think of many things that have that, like, you don't have to menu dive too much. It's just everything's right there on the screen. It's like, it's a little magic box.
We kind of already led me down this, but let's do a rig rundown. What are each of you doing live? What is your instrument?
It keeps changing, but for the tour that you saw, we really, just because of travel and space, we needed to really size it down. So I was using a Korg monologue, which I would play tones out of that into the Tascam Model 12 mixer is what we use as kind of our head. But I personally was playing the Korg monologue, and then the Korg monologue through MIDI was playing synths in Ableton, and then I used a push 2 to change any of the parameters of the soft synths that I was using in Ableton. And the push 2 also triggers the loops and song changes. And then I typically use a 303 Devilfish, Roland 303 Devilfish mod for the 303. And this is a great pedal of Stella's. I guess you could call it a pedal. That's the Neon Egg. What's it called?
Planetarium. Yeah, this guy in the UK makes it. They're amazing, amazing pedals. I've actually got our case here. I can show you.
Cool.
Sitting right next to me.
But
I think this is the case. Yeah.
But I run that. I run that through a. Oh yeah, there you go.
Oh, look at that! That's wild.
Yeah, cool.
So on the left, the white is the reverb, blue is the echo, and pink is the compressor. And what's really great is I run out of the Tascam 12. I run the kick drum because we have the kick on a separate channel out of the TR8 into that compressor, and you get like sidechain compression live. So it's really pumping. So it gives it like a nice.
Yeah, and it sidechains the effects as well. So you can have the reverb sidechaining as well as the pump that you would just naturally get from sidechaining the rest of the signals. It's an amazing, amazing pedal. You definitely still make
and that's what I run my. Yeah, I run my soft synths through that, which gives it a better feel. So it's running out of Ableton. I'm controlling it with the push and the chord, but as it goes through that, the planetarium, and then back into the mixer, it really just gives all the soft synths like a much bigger feel. And you can, with those effects, you can really get some really nice textures and stuff going.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you had between you? Was that set up between you so you both could mess with it? I feel like there was something you were both. That was
the Model 12, so that has built-in reverb as well. So you can adjust compression on that one because I think all the channels have compression, like a one knob thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's got like just the aux send, so you can run different effects to it. The Neon Egg was just being run.
Cool.
Yeah. That thing's really great, and the great thing about that as well is that we can record all our sets without a computer. So even if we didn't have Ableton and we were just doing like a DAW-less setup, it records to micro SD, the whole set, and we keep joking that like in an emergency we'd just press play on the last set that we did and just kind of fake it.
Well, the cool thing is that it multi-track records.
Yeah.
That's what amazed me. It's not just recording like a master channel. Yeah, it's recording each individual channel. So when you do a playback, you've got your faders, and like worst case scenario, you've got an older set. You play with your faders and effects, and you can still put a show together and kind of. It's a nice little safety net, but it has so many features. I'm really impressed with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. The 12 one is like, I think digital, but the 16 and the 24 are all completely analog. So you can do the same thing, but we just wanted those techno tables that they always set up for like a kind of electronic set. We just wanted everything to fit really well on that, so we don't have things like hanging off or being taped onto the table or whatever. So that one works really well. And then for these sets, just pared down to a single drum machine, which is the Roland TR8S. And you can import a lot of your own samples into it, and then it just has like the standard step sequencing stuff, but it's got a lot more variation than just like a standard 808 or 909 clone, because it's got like per pattern there's 6 variations, maybe even more. It's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So you can really, it's got 8. You can build each pattern incrementally, and it's got motion record and things like that. It's a really amazing, powerful drum machine. And I used to also have an MFB Tanscar, which is actually somewhere in Bryan's studio right now, and that was kind of my secondary drum machine. It's like all analog, really unique sounding drum machine, but it's half broken right now, so we decided not to put on tour. I like the frame of the drum machine is sunken into the thing, So like I have to like press really hard on these tiny little buttons that are half the size of my fingertip to get like to switch between patterns and stuff. And it was almost worth it because it is such a cool sounding drum machine.
Great
Great
hi-hats.
So good. Like the clacky stuff on it is so really, really nice. But yeah, for this round, we just went with the TR8. I think for any next shows that we do, I think we missed that extra like juice.
I don't think we've ever had the same gear except for this tour. Every single time we would play before, we would bring new gear into it because we've used the 606 before. Because I have a 606 Devilfish that we've used. You know, the Tansa bar. We've used filter pedals, different guitar pedals, distortion pedals, fuzz pedals. Like we just keep adding and playing with stuff.
Yeah, we had my MPC 1000 for a long time. That was the MIDI hub for a minute, and that was really cool. But I wouldn't mind going back to that actually. Yeah, it's just kind of what are the sets like? What are we kind of trying to achieve? How long are the sets? How much space do we have on a table? All those things factor into what gear we end up bringing for a particular show.
Is there any rehearsal ahead of time?
We did a little bit. Yeah. We did have 2 days or something before this tour.
Yeah. 2 days, a couple hours at a time. It's more what's like our rehearsal is not really learning the songs. It's just kind of fine tuning the tones. And then once we get on stage, then we can, whatever happens. You know, we don't want to, there's no reason to really over rehearse it. But that was the thing when I told Stella, you know, should we just be doing what everyone else is doing and have a flash drive into a CDJ? Because, you know, when you're running all this gear through a submix on stage, you know, you don't have that mixed sound that you have on the record. Like something like that snare might come out of the TR8 that sounds great in the studio, and then in a live venue it's just splitting your head in half. You know, there's nothing to really tone it down, and that was happening a lot because we were, you know, there are a lot of drum sounds and whatnot within the set. So that makes me nervous. And so the rehearsals were mainly about, let's try to get the volume levels at the right space. Let's make sure like these tones all sound good together. And then, you know, whatever happens, you know, it's great because, you know, if you've got things, if your machines are working and the clock is running, it really allows you to just have fun at that point. So you're not stressed out on trying to hit the right note or, you know,
how's this kick going to sound?
Time.
Yeah. How's this one instrument going to sound once I bring it in? That's always like the most stressful things. Like here comes the drop and I'm bringing it back in and then it just sounds like bonkers, you know?
What are your individual roles on stage?
I would say it's pretty stage versus when we were making the records, pretty different. On stage, I stick primarily to the drum programming and the drum machines and the effects that are associated with that. And Bryan primarily deals with the melodic information and the bass. So we do that kind of conventional split live, but that was definitely not the case in the studio. I think we exchanged roles pretty like fluidly, you know. It was a fluid exchange of just kind of ideas or tracks, and it wasn't like, well, you stay in your lane and I'll stay in mine and we'll collaborate like that. It was very much like a lot more free. But I think it would be confusing if I was like, I think when you're in the improvised moment, to be worrying about what's going on with this like polysynth while you're bringing back a kick drum or changing the drum pattern or whatever, it is really nice to stay in the lane when we're performing live and just trust each other that it's gonna sound great together, but individually we're kind of doing our job.
Do you remember
I can't do what you do on the drum machine. I can't. I'm not capable of Stella's very good programming drums,
So
and it's
you.
very humbling for me. I know, but then when I see you, I'm like, holy shit, I got a ways to go here. It's just very, like, I love the way that you use the motion controls and stuff. I can like get some stuff, but it feels stiff. Where you can take a drum machine and you can make it sound like a human is behind it. I don't really have that, so it's nice that that's your job.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan is doing, to be fair, so much more than I am on stage when I do watch like all the things that you're dealing with. So you're like, I have to change the 303 pattern and I've got to launch the clips from Ableton. It's like there's so much going on, and I definitely couldn't do his job either, especially like programming a 303 is just like, I still don't understand how it's done. I've watched a few videos like from the 303 clones and stuff, and it's still quite confusing to me. It's like
it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it's counterintuitive instrument, but that's kind of what makes it so fascinating, because these things happen sometimes that are a little bit accidental, even if you can be in the same key, but then like this one thing that you've accidentally programmed will just be the thing that makes it so unique and special.
Do you remember the first thing you ever played together?
As this project, or just as two humans playing music?
That's a good question. How about both?
I'll say I'm trying to think the first time we ever played music. Was that in any way before Neon Neon?
Was it with no, I think it might have been Neon Neon, really. I think we did that, the More project, but I don't think we were ever together on that. You were doing stuff, and then I came in and did percussion work for them.
Yeah, we did a lot of the same. We played a lot of the same shows, but I don't think we played in the same band till the Neon stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was that project? Were you playing traditional drum set, Stella?
Yeah, that's Bryan's project. It's a band that him and Gruff from Super Furry Animals. They have a project that. How many records did you guys make?
2
records.
Yeah, so
and then the second one
toured on the second one, the second album. She did West Coast dates with us. It was like Stella and Kate LeBon and Griff and me and Hugh. Yeah. And I guess the rehearsals are probably that's probably the first time we played together, just sitting down, which is funny to think.
It's so weird. I don't know if I think that's true, but it feels strange just because we knew each other quite well at that point and we were friends. Yeah. So it wasn't like this, it didn't feel very new necessarily, but
we've probably seen each other play so much in the same room that it just felt like we had played together.
Yeah, in bands for years.
So Bryan, what was Neon Neon? You were playing guitar, singing. What was your role in that?
It changed. I mean, it's with the records. I made most of the music, and then Griff would sing, and then add, guitar at times to it. But live on stage, I played. Oh gosh, it switched. I would do either bass or like the more electronic drums. I'd play on like an SPDS with Tom. I think on that particular tour with Stella, I think I was just doing. I don't know what I was doing. What was I doing?
I guess you were playing synths.
Oh, synth. Yeah, of course. I was doing the synths. Mm-hmm. So it changed. Like the first record, I was mainly playing bass, and then second record mainly synths and drum machines and stuff. But Stella, we always had a live drummer with that project.
So when did the two of you decide to try electronic music?
That was probably 2015-ish, 16-ish. What?
Yeah.
When did we set up?
Absolutely 20. I feel like it might have been 2016 because I think I was still I was in and out of recording that third Warpaint record in LA. So I feel like that was that makes sense to me. 2016,
Yeah, I think 2016. The story with that was we originally were making this record, the Beef record, with our friend Eric Wareheim, who's of Tim and Eric, like part of the comedy duo.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim and Eric have this really great space that they just weren't using. And Eric was invited us. He's like, come set up your gear. Like, we're all summer. There's really nothing happening in here. So come on in, and that'll be easy for me to come over and like help you guys or assist in it. And so Stella and I, it was pretty funny because I think we had this idea that we were just going to knock the record out maybe in that couple month period. So we brought so much stuff in. We had
all of our
guitars and basses and drum kit.
Yeah.
It's just this big circle of gear, like tons of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so Stella and I would go in, and that was really the first playing together with electronic stuff. And even I remember it very well. Like the first time we played, it was so much fun because we didn't have to really communicate, and we were hitting changes and stuff already, and everything was super tasteful. Mm-hmm. And we recorded all of these. We recorded it fully analog. We have hours of those absolutely film studio sessions.
Yeah. It was all stereo,
which were really fun
as well. Like we just summed everything. So when later on we were like, "Oh, wouldn't this be cool if we could take out the kick?" And I was like, "No, you can't do it. It is what it is." No. But we ended up sampling a lot of that. Actually, I remember when we had that record. I mean, the song didn't make it on the record, but it was on the record for a bit. The Crunch one had that like drum loop that we put through the amp and stuff like that. I'm sure there's stuff from those sessions that made it on the record as well.
Yeah, there are different sounds.
Yeah, I think prior to that, obviously, Bryan has made several records in, I guess, what you would call the electronic genre. And I was always interested in electronic music, and also had kind of done a lot of programming for my band and for other productions and stuff like that. So it didn't really feel like, oh, this is some like harebrained idea that we've had. It's cute little like, hobby project with a friend. It kind of felt like we both were really hungry to do something like this and didn't really have a vehicle for it necessarily. And I'm sure, Bryan has like a great output of music, but sometimes that maybe doesn't fit in with a solo project or with Boom Bip or Neon Neon or something else. And, I think we were talking always about just the songs we kind of had left over, and things started sharing music that we had made and felt like we were on the same page with our influences and things like that. And, to me, that was the origin. It wasn't just like this big shift between playing in Bryan's band and just being primarily a musician, a drummer, and then switching to this like brand new territory. I feel like I'd been microdosing electronic music for like a good 10 years before that, and like collecting all these drum machines and synths, and making music pretty much just for myself. I mean, some of those instruments make it onto Warpaint records, or some of those ideas make it onto other records. But I kind of I really wanted some place to put that music, and the idea of doing it with someone that I respected and whose music I really loved just felt like a no-brainer,
And I think early on too, we liked the idea of a duet, because when we were sharing music, we were sharing a lot of late 80s, early 90s Warp record type bands. So like LFO or 808 State, All Techer, like there's that electronic duet. And that dynamic seems to work really well. And I know you and I had a love for that. And so, you know, it was really fun to just be like, let's do that. Let's hook up some old machines and see what happens.
Yeah. And it kind of, I'm sure Bryan deals with this a lot. And I kind of, when I was just messing around making music for myself, it gets a little bit lonely when you're making kind of cold electronic music on your own. It almost makes the experience colder and it influences the music in a way. I think it's really fun just to have somebody else that you're doing it with that feels more like a band without the stress of like multiple extreme personalities or with an opinion. It's like this really streamlined way to have a collaborative musical experience.
Definitely. I'm very familiar with the Lonely Boy records. That's all I've ever done.
Lonely Boy.
Lonely, sad boy electronic music. That's my genre right there.
So did collaborating feel like a breath of fresh air? Did you have to kind of learn how to do it? I mean, if you're not used to doing it.
It did. Well, I did it with Griff, you know. So I had the neon thing, and then we brought in a lot of guests. But you know, for me, it's like a palate cleanser almost. Like every, let's say, 2 solo records, I'm just lonely. It's like I need somebody else in here to collaborate with. And so I've had those projects. I would say every couple of records I got to collaborate with somebody, and that to balance it out, that feels nice. But now I'm getting ready to go into doing a solo record, and I'm kind of looking forward to that again. But I also can't wait to record with Stella again, because I know we just have so many ideas and gear that we're excited about to kind of dig into. And so
yeah, and we don't really have we keep talking about creating a record of the improv sets in a way, like almost doing kind of weirdly like a live album, but in a studio, you know, not at a venue, and being able to multi-track it and then tweak it from then. But yeah, like exploring more and more of that improvised nature of how the project kind of started.
Does it feel weird for you to not be behind a drum set on stage?
No, it's so nice. Right. I like most of when I am performing on stage, I've been playing a little bit of keyboards as well with other bands, and either that or playing drums, and I'm just constantly sitting down. And it's not good for like my vascular system. It's not good for my bum. You know, just on a purely physiological level, it's like quite boring. So I like the idea of standing up without standing up and being like, this is my solo project. You know, I don't have to be a star or don't have to like fully perform in a way, but it still just feels different. And I know we've talked about, I think in the future when we do belief sets, we'll definitely incorporate some live drums in some kind of integrative or tasteful way, instead of just like just bashing along to like pre-recorded tracks, like having some kind of like, you know, there's so much technology now that allows a connection between what's happening in the MIDI world and what's happening in the acoustic world. So we're excited to kind of explore that given the opportunity. But it's also really nice for me to take a break from this thing that, you know, when I have an idea, the only way I've been able to really express it in the past is through drums, acoustic drums, you know, and there's only so far you can go with that. And I've definitely not achieved like the peak of that necessarily, but I think it was good for me as a musician to challenge myself with expressing the same kind of ideas and same influences, but through different instruments that weren't necessarily instruments that I was really excited to learn how to use and learn, you know, slowly over the course of my lifetime, try and master to some degree. So that's really refreshing for me. I think I kind of I was more extreme with, okay, this is just what I'm doing and I'm not going to play any drums. And Bryan was really, really gently and really respectfully was like, you know what, I think the album could actually use a little bit of live drumming, like whether it's samples of your drumming and breaks and things like that. So we found a really nice way of incorporating that so it doesn't just sound like a kind of, like a DJ playing with a live drummer kind of thing, which I've seen a few of those collaborations, and they're just not really, it just feels like a bit novelty, feels a bit gimmicky, and we still wanted to make a really great sounding record as opposed to like this vanity project or something. So it was exciting and fun to kind of have that push from Bryan to be like, it could actually benefit the record to have a little bit of that live energy.
I remember too, because we discussed it, and when I proposed it to you, I didn't want it to be like typical drum breaks, because then, like with the music we're doing, it can slip into that kind of trip hop dated sound pretty easily when you have like live drums with some synths. It can, and if it's instrumental, it just instantly, it's just like, that sound.
Yeah.
And we wanted to be careful with that. So, we found some fun, creative ways to incorporate Stella's drumming to the record, whether that is her playing like a live hi-hat and maybe a snare over some other hi-hats and snare from a drum machine. And it gives it kind of that extra layer and that kind of human feel that works really nicely, because you can tell it's not just a drum machine, but it also isn't just like a drum kit mic'd up. It had like a nice fun vibe. I don't know if I guess we did record breaks out at Rancho de la Luna and chop those up, but I was thinking, like, with kick drums, we didn't really use a live kick that much, because that it's pretty important to have that tone at least really solid and
really controlled,
on grid, really controlled, and then percussion, cymbals, mid-range stuff we get pretty loose with it and let Stella kind of do her thing there. But we wanted it to get that electronic feel. We kind of mostly used drum machine kicks.
And let's go, if you don't mind, going into the writing process, because this fascinates me, especially with this genre. When you could basically start anywhere, how do you guys start? What is the first note that gets played or dropped in?
I think it just depends on the song. I personally, I'm pretty sure Bryan would agree, I don't have a go-to formula for making music. It's more just, for me, I don't regularly, with this kind of music, have, a melody in my head or a drum beat or something that's just like, I've got to get this thing out. I've got to express this thing that's just looping in my head. For me, it's more about kind of harnessing experimental moments in the studio when you've just bought a new piece of gear, or you've pulled something out of keyboard and you're just putting it through, put it through this weird delay pedal or this harmonizer, and then you kind of get an idea. So the general, like, three things that usually inspire me are like a drum break or a drum sound or a programmed drum, some kind of arpeggiated chord movement, whether it's like a programmed thing or sampled thing or something that I'm playing live, and then build drums underneath that and other textures underneath that. And then the third one would be, I often get very inspired by like a found sample of something, and it could be a melodic thing, it could be a vocal sample, it could be something like that, but that's the thing that usually sets my imagination on fire, and then I can imagine all the other things happening. But it's rarely like out of thin air, I have this fully formed idea and then I go and have to find the specific instruments that will illuminate that idea or bring that idea to life. So for me, it's mostly just about I have fun in the studio. Typically, I'll be playing with something or experimenting with something and maybe learning how to use a drum machine or a synth or a sampler or something like that. Mm-hmm. And while you're in the process of the scholarly process of, okay, well, how do I connect these things and how do I make sequences and blah, 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 then you just like start, I kind of get the hang of it, and then you start doing something, and then all of a sudden you're out of like the manual mode and you're in creative mode, and you just kind of go somewhere with that, and then you record that piece of music, and then you might put a kick drum under it, and all of a sudden it has a kind of life. And then I would keep that and develop that, or I would send those ideas to Bryan and kind of try and, if I was sharing an idea with Bryan, I would generally try and give it some kind of movement, so it has like 2 or 3 acts or 2 or 3 changes. It wouldn't be like, here's just a drum loop that goes for 7 minutes. Good luck, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I do things, yeah.
Same for me. I'm mostly inspired by a sound. And when you have, synthesizer that has 128 presets on it, you could just start playing, and then something clicks in your head where you're like, oh, I really like this sound. You come up with like a little something. It's just like a sketch. You loop it, throw a kick under it. That's the typical process, I think. So it starts with just being inspired by a sound, but that could be drums too. And then it's like inspired by sound, and then build upon it, and then kind of build it up, and then subtract stuff and replace stuff if you need to. But there's never really like the reason I love electronic music and have chosen to do electronic music is because I like playing with sounds and instruments and toys when I go into a studio. If I've gone into a few writing rooms where they have the standard like Fender Rhodes, a bass, a guitar, and a piano and a drum kit, and I'm terrified. I'm like, you have to have songs to make music in here. I don't have songs, what I have is just creative input, So for me, if I see like some synths or a lot of guitar pedals, I'm like, oh, okay, I can work in here, But if it's just like a Rhodes, I'm like that can't work. I can't do this. Yeah. Like I'm not. See, I'm not your guy. So that's fun. Just to play, and synths have so many deep layers that they never get boring. And even like tapping into like the modular stuff, it's just like, holy shit! Like this is a lifelong exploration here that I've can just dive into.
So the arrangements on the record feel relatively sparse. So did you have to go through a lot of like building things up and removing, and then how many of the original ideas actually made the final arrangement? Because it didn't feel like there's a whole lot of elements going on in each tune.
No, and I think that was something that's a battle that I always have when it comes to electronic music. I think it's hard to keep it minimal. So I'm actually glad to hear you say that, because for me, it feels pretty full. And I think if I have a criticism on my own solo music is I add too much to it. And some of the best classic dance tracks are what Stella and I wanted to do is very minimal. It's like 3 or 4 elements.
Yeah.
And so we tried really hard to do that, but I'm like a melodic beast. Like I have to add some type of melody to everything. And I think that's why I really love Aphex Twin, is because he was always able to take some really kind of hardcore percussive stuff and add a melody to it. And suddenly it's just like this intensely beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I'm kind of haunted with that beast a bit in me, where I have to kind of add melody. And what happens with that, as soon as you add that element, then you start building it. You know what I mean? Oh, we got to take it out here. Oh, there should be a change here, and and then you got to be really careful because you're like, oh, we're actually starting to build a song. We need to pull back. You know, we got to get back into that dance category where nothing happens except for dropouts, and you're just hearing dropouts and, you know, adding and subtracting. It's not really how do we change key or get out of this, you know? Yeah. So, you know, that's I think that was the hardest thing about making the record for me, was how far do we take it? Like, we really want to keep it minimal to the stuff that we really love, but yet these songs are kind of coming out of us, and this is just kind of a natural melody that we're both hearing. So there's songs like Young, I think, on the record that we made it very melodic and really beautiful. And I think out of any of the songs, I feel like that song sounds like Stella and I the most. That's kind of that's what we sound like. I think if we could make a whole record that sounded like that, we probably would. But we also want to make just like banging techie stuff too, where it doesn't have any of that melody. So that balance was, you know, it's tough to find that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Bryan said about being really aware of not adding too much information or not necessarily being too clever with things. You know, you can have moments where you kind of flex an idea, a musical idea or a rhythmic idea that keeps the, like, sustains interest over the course of a song or a record. But a lot of the music that I listen to and I most enjoy are just these, like, two very, you know, two elements with hard intention, really. Two or three elements with hard intention. And that, to me, feels, you can always feel when something has, like, the sound of that thing is just so vital. It really doesn't need a lot more, you know, and the more that you add to it and the more that you harmonize with it and the more that you tweak it and the more that you drop it out and bring it back in, it takes the power away from the song. And I think you could say the same about playing an instrument. Like with drumming, when I was younger, it was just too much. It was so many ideas and just so much, you know, for lack of a better word, there was a lot of vanity involved when you are learning, you're getting your chops up and you just want to, you know, you have a lot to prove. And I think that also happens when you're making music. It still happens to me when I make music. I don't even realize that my intentions are going there till I listen back to something like, well, there's so much going on. It's too much information. So I think, you know, it's that same kind of idea can be traded to electronic music and composition. I guess that's ultimately what it is, you know, that same thing of, like, sometimes you're playing drum. I listen back to some performances where I'm playing with Warpaint or playing with other people, and I'm like, I wish I didn't fill there, or I wish I didn't do that. Like, I'm spoiling the pocket in that moment. And I know what I was thinking. I was thinking, well, this is kind of tricky, but then I listened back to it and it's like, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't give me that same, what is actually satisfying is the idea and the commitment to the idea and the slight variations on that idea. That's like my whole musical philosophy these days. And every time I stray from that, I notice it and it bothers me. So at this moment, I might go back to, you know, making music that is more layered and complex and intellectual or cerebral. But at the moment, that's not the music that I enjoy really listening to. I mean, I don't listen to, like, you know, brainless music necessarily. It's just a different intention, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's what satisfies me. That's what nourishes me musically. And so that's what I hope to kind of express as a musician or as a composer or in whatever way, you know, that just resonates with me.
For me, it's repetition. You know, that repetition is what I've always been attracted to it. So 5 minutes of the same thing kind of happening with just variations of that. Like, that's why I love krautrock and techno and, house music, all that stuff. I've just really, or even Sonic Youth, stuff, bands like that just really focus on repetition. That's where I find my peace, and I can really get engaged. If there's too much happening, too many changes, and similar to your Warpaint thing where you're like, oh, I shouldn't do that. Phil, for me, I can listen back to some of my catalog and I'm like, oh, I just put 3 songs in one song. That's really cool. Like that, great idea there, Bryan, to have a full change, Like I've got all these ideas. I just got to get them out in 4 minutes. I hope you like it. And people are just like, huh? What?
How do you know when a song is finished?
Oh man, that's the question, isn't it? That's like,
how long is a piece of string?
Yeah. Is there a God? Is there a God?
Is the song finished? I think honestly, I think that's what's really good about having another person to collaborate with, is that sometimes, if I was by myself, I would maybe question the end point of a song or of a piece of music. So it's nice to have this other person that hopefully you agree to the moment when the song is finished and when it's satisfying to both of us. Also, we can influence each other and say, well, hey, we text each other, hey, do you actually think this breakdown in this song, could that actually change in this way? And it's like, no, don't touch it. Don't touch it. It's my favorite part, and then you're like, okay, good. But without that input.
I love that,
Yeah. Without that input, honestly, if these were 2 solo records, they probably would have taken 3 times as long to make. I don't know. But I can't speak for Bryan, but I know that I would take a lot longer if I didn't have somebody to validate the idea or validate the end point of something. So I think it's really influenced by the collaboration for me personally.
I think I've become pretty sensitive to that, of knowing when to stop. And for me, it's if you're exhausted by it, if you're waiting for something to happen and you're making a few attempts at it, then you should maybe think about leaving at that point. Like it's time to maybe stop. And what's interesting about that question related to our record is that we thought the record was done right before the pandemic happened. We were like, oh, we've got an opportunity here. Like, let's get it delivered. Let's get it mastered. Let's get this thing done. And then suddenly the world shut down, and we're like, oh, this might not be a good time to release a new project. If we can't tour it or anything. So we sat on it for like a year while everybody was, in their own pod situation. And then as we kind of started revisiting after like 7 or 8 months, or at least for me, I'd be like, Stella, I don't know if this is done. What do you think if we add a hi-hat pattern here? That? So we sat on what we thought was a finished product for, almost a year. And then decided to revisit some of the tracks that didn't make the record again. I'm like, let's just have a listen to this and be like, ooh, I like that. I forgot about that track. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's get this mixed and see if this is going to work. So we ended up having a finished product, sitting on it for 8 months, which was kind of a luxury, to be honest. Totally. I feel like if anybody could do that, it'd be nice. Like, I'm going to deliver a record, but then you've got 8 months to think about it,
you got
listen
a grace
to it,
period,
and then finish it. Yeah. And so we were able to kind of take off a few tracks, put in some new ones, add some layers, and and then it felt complete at around what we delivered. I think felt pretty complete.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, that's a tough one to know, because it just depends on how long you want to sit on. You don't ever have to finish a song if you don't want to. It could be like a lifelong situation. I'm sure there are a lot of musicians out there who have that. They have demos. I know I have demos that are 25 years old on my computer that I just will pull back up and be like, oh, I still like this.
Yeah.
But I have no idea what to do with it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I can close it.
Yeah, I hate the feeling. I've just had this feeling a lot with bands and with other material where you're just like, everyone hates the song. It's been worked on to death. It's been, all the joy has been just like sucked out of it over time. And it's really just like that thing of like nitpicking something, maybe not loving it as much as you should have, or appreciating it as much as you should have before you started getting in there and tweaking it, losing the perspective of like, what actually is this? What are the essential elements of this song or this piece of music? And I think I definitely have learned to like never get to that place. And if you get to that place, then it's not going on the record. And it needs years to breathe, perhaps. You know.
There's some great Tom Petty quote I remember about that, where he talked about no song should ever have more than 5 elements and take more than 2 hours or something like that. You know, he was like, beyond that, it's become a task or a chore. He's like, either the song's there or it's not. I can't remember. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but I remember that really stuck with me, just thinking like, yeah, if you can't really make the song happen within 4 or 5 elements, and you know, like that creative period that we were kind of talking about, Stella, where we're inspired by a song and we add a kick drum to it, and you know, within that 2 hour window, you kind of have your song.
Yeah,
you know, you have it, and you enjoy it, and then you're like, okay, we'll come back to it later. But a lot of times that's the meat right there, and then it's only like a little bit of stuff. But if you have like several weeks and days that you're just spending hours on it, I think you might want to move on. You know.
So we're at the end of the hour here, so this might be the hardest question for each of you to answer, but most of our listeners are acoustic drummers. So I want to send them with some things to check out. So what would be your 2 or 3 records for electronic music for someone who is interested in it but doesn't really know where to start?
Or I would say an iconic drum programming, drum manipulating electronic record would be Square Push's Feed Me Weird Things. That would be top of my list for you know, a drummer, like it's a gateway drug for an acoustic drummer that maybe listens to a lot of, you know, King Crimson, a lot of fusion jazz, things like that. Like Square Pusher is very influenced by that world, and I think there's like a really, really easy, comfortable bridge between those two worlds, and you'll hear a lot of those ideas like refreshed and reimagined on Square Push's records, but especially that one. I would start with that.
And I would say my first one that comes to mind that still blows my mind is, and I mean, it's very stereotypical, but it's Aphex Twin, the Drukes record, Druqs, I think. Their tracks on there like Melt Face 6 and like Voldhorsen, you know, he has all these strange names for stuff. But if you listen to the drum programming on that record and on some of those tracks, I still, as you know, 25 years into making electronic music, kind of have no idea how he's getting that sort of level of programming, because if you just went in and started doing all those MIDI notes and stuff, seems like it would take years to get it.
It's so advanced. Advanced.
So for any drummer, you know, when you listen to that programming, it has a human, even though it's very robotic. I know it still has like this kind of human element. I think that any drummer can really enjoy, because it's like listen to Bernard Purdy playing ghost notes or something. You know, it's got that same
so detailed,
vibe where you're just hearing these like little things happening, and you're like, wow, that's really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a third one. I mean, for drummers, I mean, we are very reverent of Mark Bell, anything that LFO does. But I think just he's an amazing example of a very organic sounding drum programmer and synth programmer, and very musical. But I also would probably have to mention I love our friend Sam from Floating Points. His record Crush, I would say, is like it's a feat of drum programming, and it's a more recent addition to the kind of electronic music world that I think is really impressive and really swung and really organic. And he's an incredible musician in his own right, so he's able to kind of translate that into electronic music tones, and I think there's a lot to absorb on that record.
Beautiful. Thank you guys so much. So what's next? Any more live shows coming up?
Yeah, I think we're going to do something in LA, something in London in the next few months, and maybe make some new music in the meantime. But yeah, just focusing on promoting the record and doing some fun special shows in the meantime.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're not already a listener to the Drum Candy podcast, you can find it on all podcast platforms, whether it's Spotify or Google or Apple, or you can also find it on the drumclick.com. That is our podcast network. There are 4 other great shows on that network over there, so go check that out. And also make sure you're liking and sharing and subscribing to our channel here. We have new videos posting almost every day, and new podcast episodes drop every Friday. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.